to see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bucklers stinging air, gave proof to the night that a flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
While historians disagree as to when the first Americans reached the Western Hemisphere, there is no disagreement as to where the Bering Strait between Siberia and Alaska. Most scholars place the arrival at between 15,000 and 30,000 years ago. It appears that the receding waters exposed enough of a land bridge over the 56 miles to separate the two continents we now know, North America and Asia. These two continents were for groups to migrate across on at least two occasions. The Asian immigrants probably followed large game of animals such as mammoths, bison, and giant ground sloths. The small groups gradually spread across North and South America, and there is evidence that some reached the tip of South America by 9000 BCE. Among more than 2,000 separate cultures, the most developed and advanced in the New World were the Incas, Mayas, and the Aztecs. Surrounding tribes in 1000 CE were conquered by the Incas. The Incas eventually controlled more than 2,500 miles of land.
That's a lot of land.
That's an excessive amount of land. By the 1500s, the Incas were the largest and the wealthiest of all the ancient empires of the Americas. The Incas constructed enormous, alluring, and pulchritudinous palaces surrounded by high walls in Peru, and connected many mountain towns and villages with elaborate network of roads. The Incas created a system of terraces to farm effectively on a hillside. Can you farm? How can you farm on a steep hillside?
I'm not sure. I've never farmed.
They also utilized canals and aqueducts to their own benefit by using it to supply the land with water. Preston, can you take a guess at what how they contributed in our world diet?
I know this. It's tomatoes and potatoes.
Correct.
Yes.
Although their literacy in the written language was low in percentage, the Incan governmental system was well organized, especially when the Spanish conquistadors came into the picture. Preston, who were these conquistadors and where did they come from?
They were conquerors from Spain.
True. Francisco Pizarro and his brothers, along with his 200 men, they actually defeated the Incans, who had 18,000 soldiers.
How is that possible?
I don't know. Through faith, possibly. The Mayans were a sophisticated civilization. They constructed observatories, developed accurate calendars, knew of the mathematical concept of zero, and invented their own writing system. Most of the written record of the Mayans were destroyed by Spanish invaders. The first ceremonial buildings appear to have been constructed about 1000 BCE. The Mayans were sophisticated farmers and used raised fields to plant maize, the cereal grain that is the ancestor of modern corn. The Mayas went into a decline in around 800 CE and were ruled as smaller city-states when the Spanish conquest began in the 1520s.
The latest of the three advanced civilizations to develop were the Aztecs. They arrived at what is now Mexico City in the 13th century. The city was the center of a large empire. It featured elaborate temples and canals and boasted a population of over 100,000 people. That's a lot of people, isn't it, Gio?
Sure is.
The Aztecs developed a highly organized society ruled by a king and included a class of priests and tax collectors, a warrior elite, and an active merchant class. The Aztecs were a warlike people, using prisoners for human sacrifice that was central to their religion. The Aztecs were conquered shortly after the arrival of Spaniard Hernan Cortez in 1519, and their king Moctezuma was killed. How was he killed, you may ask? Good question. Do you know, Gio?
Not at all.
Well, truthfully, I don't know. That is something you must determine. The Spaniards said that Moctezuma was attacked with stones and arrows that inflicted fatal wounds by his own people after he tried to submit to Spanish forces. But the Aztecs, on the other hand, believed that their king was murdered by the Spanish, who only came for treasure. What do you think, people? The Anasazi built 5-story pueblos in Chaco Canyon and cliff dwellings in what is now Arizona and New Mexico, and created a system of roads that reached villages 400 miles away. They even watered their crops with systems of irrigation canals. Isn't that awesome, Gio?
Sure is.
The Indians that lived in the Mississippi Valley found an area that provided rich soil and a network of rivers that allowed for fishing, hunting, and trade. Beginning about 800 AD, immigrants to the area, perhaps from Yucatan Peninsula, granted new strains of maize and beans. The Natchez were one group of Mississippi Valley residents that survived well past the arrival of whites. Their ruler, known as the Great Sun, presided over a class-based society. Advisors to the Great Sun comprised of noble class and chiefs of villages. The mass of peasants called stinkards cultivated the land. The Natchez were warlike and practiced torture and human sacrifice. Eastern woodland Indians of North America occupied the lands east of the Mississippi River. They usually lived in small, self-governing clans of related families and were governed by clan leaders. Unlike the Aztec or Mayan rulers, however, these kinship-based systems used consensus rather than coercion to govern. The peoples of this region, spoke a wide variety of languages belonging to a few language groups. Most of the Indians living between the St. Lawrence River and Chesapeake Bay spoke Algonquian languages. The area between the Hudson River and Great Lakes was the home of the 5 nations of the Iroquois, who spoke Equean languages. The tribes in the southeast, each as the Choctaw and Creek, spoke Muskogean language dialects. The interaction between the natives and Europeans was largely, but not always, negative. Native Americans everywhere faced drastic change in their population numbers. In some regions, as much as 95% of the population was depleted from disease in the 1st century after contact. The European exchange was when Europeans brought disease to the Indians as well as different food and wildlife. This was exchanged from the Indians to the Europeans in the same way, but not as disastrous as what the Europeans brought to the Indians. In sum, the contact with European civilizations proved disastrous for the Indian residents of the New World. They were devastated by conquering armies and by disease, and made to work as slaves. While vestiges of their cultures have survived to the present day, most of their traditions, cities, and villages and populations have been wiped out.
Yeah. If you've been saved by His power divine, and you're not ashamed to tell the world about it, come on and sing it with us. I'm saved. I'm saved, I'm saved, I'm saved. So glad I'm saved. I'm saved, I'm saved. Come on, sing it with us. I'm saved, I'm saved, I'm saved. So glad I'm saved. So glad I'm saved, I'm saved. Oh, I'm saved. sky is